Welcome to Money World. In today's video we will discuss Vladimir Putin's master plans to destroy Ukraine. Before we continue, however, don't forget to like and subscribe. This would really help the channel since this is still a new channel. But without further ado, let's dive straight into today's video. In February 2022, Vladimir Putin unleashed the biggest war in Europe since World War II with the justification that modern, Western-leaning Ukraine was a constant threat and Russia could not feel safe, develop and exist. Thousands of people have since died, towns and cities such as Mariupol lie in ruins and 13 million people have been displaced. But the questions remain, what was it all for and how will it end? Well, what was Putin's original goal? The Russian leader's initial aim was to overrun Ukraine, ending for good its desire to join the Western Defensive Alliance NATO. After a month of failures, he abandoned his bid to capture the capital Kiev and turned his ambitions to Ukraine's east and south. Launching the invasion on 24th of February, he told the Russian people his goal was to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. His declared aim was to protect people subjected to what he called 8 years of bullying and genocide by Ukraine's government. Another objective was soon added, ensuring Ukraine's neutral status. Ukraine's democratically elected president, Vladimir Zelensky, said the enemy has designated me as target number 1, my family is target number 2. His advisor said Russian troops made 2 attempts to storm the presidential compound. Russia's leader refused to call it an invasion or a war. Moscow continues to coin Europe's biggest war since 1945 a special military operation. The claims of Nazis and genocide in Ukraine are completely unfounded but part of a narrative repeated by Russia for years. And it is Russia that is now accused by the international community of carrying out war crimes. Several countries including the US and Canada go further and call it genocide. After so much destruction, the Russian leader's words ring very hollow now. It is not our plan to occupy the Ukrainian territory, we do not intend to impose anything on anyone by force. How have Putin's aims changed? A month into the invasion, Russia pulled back from Kiev and declared its main goal was the liberation of Donbass, broadly referring to Ukraine's eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. The Kremlin claimed it had generally accomplished the aims of the invasion's first phase, which it defined as considerably reducing Ukraine's combat potential. But it became clear from Russia's withdrawal that it had scaled back its ambitions. Putin needs a victory, said the head of the Russian International Affairs Council. At least he needs something he can present to his constituency at home as a victory. Russian officials are now focused on seizing the 2 big eastern regions and creating a land corridor along the south coast, east from Crimea to the Russian border. The powerful head of Russia's Security Council, Nikolai Patrushev, has spoken of Ukraine disintegrating into several states, blaming Ukrainian and Western hatred of Russia. The question is whether Russian forces have the numbers to press forward. By not declaring this a war, the Kremlin cannot mobilize nationally, and military analyst Michael Kaufman believes unless that happens. But is there a way out for both Russia and Ukraine? There is little sign of any negotiated end to this war in the immediate future. A few weeks into the war, Russia said it was considering a Ukrainian proposal of neutrality, but there have been no negotiations since the end of March. President Putin told the UN Secretary-General at the end of April, we are negotiating, we do not reject talks, but he earlier declared that negotiations are at a dead end. Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky had already accepted that Ukraine would not join NATO. It's a truth and it must be recognized. How Putin sees Ukraine. Since Ukraine achieved independence in 1991, as the Soviet Union collapsed, it has gradually looked to the West, both the EU and NATO. Russia's leader has sought to reverse that, seeing the fall of the Soviet Union as the disintegration of historical Russia. He has claimed Russians and Ukrainians are one people, denying Ukraine its long history and seeing today's independent state merely as an anti-Russia project. Ukraine never had stable traditions of genuine statehood, he asserted. Russia then seized Ukraine's southern region of Crimea and triggered a separatist rebellion in the east and a war that claimed 14,000 lives. As he prepared to invade in February, he tore up an unfulfilled 2015 Minsk peace deal and accused NATO of threatening our historic future as a nation, claiming without foundation that NATO countries wanted to bring war to Crimea. He has lately accused NATO of using Ukraine to wage a proxy war against Russia. But what's Putin's problem with NATO? For Russia's leader, the West's 30-member defensive military alliance has one aim: to split society in Russia and ultimately destroy it. In a Victory Day speech on 9th of May, he accused NATO of launching an active military buildup on territories adjacent to Russia. Ahead of the war, he demanded that NATO turn the clock back to 1997 and reverse its eastward expansion, removing its forces and military infrastructure from member states that joined the alliance from 1997 and not deploying strike weapons near Russia's borders. That means Central Europe, Eastern Europe and the Baltics. In President Putin's eyes, the West promised, back in 1990, that NATO would expand not an inch to the east, but did so anyway. That was before the collapse of the Soviet Union, however, so the promise made to then-Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev only referred to East Germany in the context of a reunified Germany. NATO maintains it never intended to deploy combat troops on its eastern flank, until Russia annexed Crimea illegally in 2014. So does Putin have designs beyond Ukraine? If he has, his military setbacks in Ukraine may have put paid to any wider ambitions beyond its borders. The most immediate threat is to Moldova, which is not part of NATO and has already come under Russian threat. But President Putin's ambition to roll NATO back to the late 1990s has taken a hit, with Finland and Sweden looking closely at joining an alliance that now seems as unified as ever. He has triggered the opposite effect of what he wanted. He wanted to weaken NATO, but NATO is now much stronger, says Barbara Zanketta. NATO has warned of a war that could last months or even years, and said its members need to be prepared for a long haul. Russia has already punished two NATO members, Poland and Bulgaria, for the West's support for Ukraine, by cutting off their gas supplies. Having witnessed Mr. Putin's willingness to lay waste to European cities to achieve his aims, Western leaders are now under no illusion. U.S. President Joe Biden has labeled him a war criminal, and German Chancellor Olaf Scholz believes Putin wants to build a Russian empire. He wants to fundamentally redefine the status quo within Europe in line with his own vision. What next for Russia itself? Russia has tried to silence dissent. Protests of any kind are banned and more than 15,000 people have been detained. The Russian people will always be able to distinguish true patriots from scums and traitors, said President Putin. A wide array of Western sanctions threaten to contract Russia's economy by up to 10% this year and hike inflation by more than 20%. Russia's central bank has had its assets frozen and major banks are shut out of the international SWIFT payment transfer network. The U.S. has banned imports of Russian oil and gas. The EU aims to cut gas imports by 2/3 within a year and is working on a phased oil embargo. The UK aims to phase out Russian oil by the end of 2022. Russian airlines have been barred from airspace over the EU, UK, US and Canada. Personal sanctions have been imposed on President Putin and his entourage. But will this be enough to sway Putin in the right direction? Well, we will potentially find out in the upcoming months. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel to never miss an update on the Russia-Ukraine war and other interesting topics.